Hello everyone, and today I'm so excited to share with you my complete guide to playing the Queen's Gambit. This legendary opening is widely regarded as one of the best in the entire game of chess, and as such, this is a complete guide. I'll be covering all of the main lines as well as all of the little itty bitty sidelines and counter gambits that you may face, and most importantly, I've handpicked every single move to produce the best practical results as well as being completely sound according to the engine. This video also took a lot of effort to make, so if you'd like, you can subscribe and like to support me, and without further ado, let's get started. So, the Queen's Gambit comes after we play pawn up to d4, taking center space and opening up our bishop. Black responds pawn to d5, simply mirroring us, and here we can initiate the Queen's Gambit with c4. First off, what is the point of playing c4 at all? The main point here is we're putting pressure on their pawn in the center. We also open up various squares for our queen, and we can also put our knight behind the pawn instead of in front of it, but most importantly here, black has the option to capture us. This is the Queen's Gambit accepted. I'll take a look at it first, and in general, it is not a great line because we have the nice move e4 here. And let's take a step back for a moment and just look at this. We are down a pawn, but it is black's extremely weak c4 pawn, which we are going to be able to pick up in pretty much every single variation, and other than that, we have two pawns in the center with a lot of center space, while black has basically nothing, no development, nothing in the center, they have nothing. And so black must do something. They have three main options here. They can play a move, pawn to b5, to really try and hang on to the pawn, but this is not going to work. This is a very bad variation for them. They can play a move like pawn to e6, which is more simple. We're going to be able to get the pawn back while black just tries to develop and quickly castle, which we're going to have a nice advantage in all of those positions. And their best and most complicated try is pawn to e5 to immediately try and counter strike at us, which is very double-edged and can get very complicated. But out of the trio, let's look at the weakest first, pawn to b5. This move tries to hang on, but we simply have a4 here, and all of black's hopes just crumble right away. First off, we're attacking their pawn, they have to do something. Capturing would be horrible because now everybody is hanging and their pawn structure is bad. That's just a complete disaster. We can simply take this and win both pawns. I mean, yeah, we're just doing great here. We have a very large center. What else can they try? They can try to defend with pawn to a6, but this does not work because after we capture, black has simply missed that we now have this pin here, and capturing back would simply lead to their rook just being hanging in the corner. We are already completely winning there. Their best try is to go c6 and defend like this, at which point we're going to capture, opening up our rook. All these squares are now ours. They will capture back, and here we have a very nice move and provocative knight to c3. Attacking their pawn on b5, and it is going to be nothing but trouble for them. First off, defending with their pawn on a6 once again does not work because of the same trick. Now they cannot capture because their rook will be lost in the corner. That does not work for them. What else can they try? They can try to push up to b4 and try to attack us. This really does not work. We can simply play like queen to a4 here and just win the pawn back with this fork, or if you're feeling a little crazy, you can also try knight to b5, the engine's best. Basically here, black really cannot defend the c4 pawn now, and if they're not careful, you may even have ideas of potentially going bishop to f4 here, and this fork on c7, our knight's coming in. Can black stop it? Short answer, no, they cannot. So that can end up pretty bad for them pretty quick. Their only real try here to survive would be bishop to d7 to try and defend like this, but you now have the absolute murderous and paralyzing move d5 here. This is just brutal. This move does not develop a piece, but it takes away this important square. Now their bishop just looks misplaced. It's not really covering anything important. The knight can simply not develop at all, and they are just suffering here, just endless suffering. They have two main tries from here. Pawn to e6 to try and attack us immediately is very common, but is also a mistake because we now capture, and just capturing back doesn't actually really work. They try to take the bishop, then we simply take their queen for check. They have to take back. Now they cannot castle, and we win the pawn back as well. Potentially this one too. We're just doing very, very well here. We don't really have any main problems at all. And if they try to take back with the pawn instead, this also does not work to a very nice tactic. Knight takes on b5. This looks ridiculous, but the idea here is that after they capture, we now have the very nice move here because they captured queen to h5 check, and we get a long distance fork. After they block, we simply capture, we win the pawn back. This guy is also going to be lost to something. Yeah, this is just complete brutality. There is no hope for them in that position. So because that, their only way to try and survive here would be to play a move like a6 first to consolidate and defend, and after we develop, to then go pawn to e6. But here, we still have a good position to the brutal d6. Just nothing stops in this position, just endless murder. And now their bishop, this bishop is not worth 3 points. It's like a 0.2 point bishop because this is not looking at anything. And if they try to defend, move like queen b6, try to attack us, e5. It is just complete brutality and murder. The bishop is horrible, our pawns are defended, and their position is just depressing. If I was them, I would just resign. It's not even completely lost. I would resign because I would be depressed. So that is how to just completely destroy the pawn to b5 variations and why they really do not work. Let's look at the more calm pawn to e6 variations next. Here, black gives us the pawn back. We're not beggars, we're going to take it. Black's main move here is to now play knight to f6. Attack the pawn, we'll simply play knight to c3 here. And the reason we have a slight advantage here is once again because we have two big pawns in the center, and black just cannot really compete here. The only way black can try to get a good position out of here is to eventually play the move pawn to c5, and we'll take a look at that in just a moment. First off, let's look at bishop to b4 first. If black tries to pin us and do this business here, we could simply have pawn to e5. And it looks a little surprising because black does get the very nice outpost on d5, but we have an idea here. First, we'll play knight e2. Simply defend our guy, give him a friend, and let's say black castles. We can simply castle as well. And let's say black now tries to strike in the center with c5 here. With this move, we now have the very nice queen to b3 here. Now we're putting a lot of pressure on their knight, as well as some additional pressure on their bishop as well. And pretty much everybody that goes here tends to capture our knight with the bishop. We're simply going to capture back with the pawn, and after like knight to c6, we have the savage move, bishop to a3. And here we are just completely dominating on this diagonal. We're likely going to win the pawn. And by the way, black has no chance of actually winning this. If they try knight to a5 here to try and like fork us, we actually have a very nice queen into b5. And we're actually attacking this pawn for our queen now too. Pinned to the rook. We are doing very, very well in that position. What else can they try? Let's say they go with a bit more of a low-key move. Bishop e7, just try to be safe and develop. We're not going to let them. We're going to go pawn to e5 here. Once again, their knight is attacked. They have to move it to the center, d5. And we have a very nice move here, queen to g4. You see this in some French positions. We get a kind of French structure here. And our queen is on the king side attacking them, and they really don't have any way to actually punish us. And from here we could simply castle, and if black makes the utter mistake of simply castling themselves, well, we now win here with bishop to h6. We're threatening, I mean checkmate. They have to play g6 here, their only move, and now we can simply win the rook in the corner. We're up in exchange here. We're not completely winning, but we are doing very well. You can simply go knight to f3, castle. We're doing great. And with those lines covered, let's look at the last try here, which is the immediate c5 here, trying to strike at us immediately. And here, you don't want to capture and let them develop for free. No, you're going to push up to d5. And you're actually making life pretty awkward for them. The knight cannot go to the most natural square here on c6 because of our pawn, and most commonly, black will capture, and we can actually take it back with our knight here instead of the bishop or pawn, and we're actually just doing great here. First off, also, they cannot take the pawn, because then a simple queen e2, pinning, and after they try to defend, a simple f3. we're winning a piece, so that certainly does not work for them. Most people here tend to capture our knight instead, and we could simply capture back with our bishop. And once again, we just have a good position here. Our bishop is very centralized. We have a good pawn. If black isn't careful, they may even fall into this trick with bishop takes on f7. They cannot take the bishop because then we win their queen. That's a little idea to keep in mind. But even if they simply just develop with like bishop to e7 here, then we can simply go knight to f3. Once again, just castle. We're not completely winning, but we have a nice advantage in the center, and we're going to have a good game ahead of us. Alright, so that is the e6 line covered. And by the way, I also want to say that the e6 line is pretty much the same as other lines like knight to f6 or knight to c6. Those are all very, very similar and same-ish, but what is not similar and same-ish is the move e5 here. This move is a little dangerous. There are a lot of ways you can go wrong, so I'll show you how to beat them. First off, you do not capture, you play knight to f3. You defend your center. This is the most important thing. The best move here is to capture on d4 for the pawn, and I'll look at this in a moment, but a lot of people here try the move bishop to g4 to pin our knight to the queen, but this is not great now because of bishop takes on c4, and in reality, we're actually going to have a lot of pressure on them, and they have to be very careful. If they simply capture on d4 here, then we have the very nice bishop takes on f7 check. And after king takes, a simple knight e5 check, and they get forked. We're going to win the pawn back. Now black cannot castle. This is just simply miserable. Not too much to say there. And they really cannot try to win the pawn either with like bishop takes on f3 because queen takes back, and we're threatening checkmate. So capturing would just be very, very sad. So bishop g4 here certainly does not work. Instead, capturing immediately is better. And here, you don't actually take the guy in the center. You instead play bishop takes on c4 here, leaving this guy just kind of hanging in the center, because even though we are still down a pawn here, we are gaining development, and we have the strong pawn in the center, while once again, black has basically nothing. The main move here is to go knight to c6 and protect. One little note, if they try pawn to c5, you have a very nice way to get a good position here. Knight into e5. Very fun move. Attacking the f7 pawn, they do not have a good way to defend it. Their only try would be bishop to e6 like this, but we can simply capture, pawn takes, and now queen goes into h5. This is complete brutality. If they go g6, we can capture it with our knight. They cannot take back because we have this pin, and if they play knight to f6 to attack our queen, not to worry, we can simply back up to h3 and attack this pawn, and so they really have no other option except to capture, and we can simply capture the rook, or up in exchange, we can quickly castle. We really do not have that many problems in that position, so trying to defend with c5 is just not very good. Their best try is knight to c6 to attempt to defend like this, and here we have the simple and sweet castles. Not too much else here, but black does have to be very careful. Once again, if they try bishop to g4 here, we win with the very nice move queen to b3 instead of bishop takes on f7, but we still have the same idea. This is now attacked, this is now attacked. Can they defend both? No. If they try to defend with like bishop takes on f3, by the way, you can take on f7 first, king runs, and then queen to e6 is actually just straight up checkmate. That's a nice little idea to keep in mind. Their better try here though is to play queen to d7 and just, damage control, just try to let us have it. But we can still get a good position here with bishop takes an f7 check, because even though they can capture, we take this and they get forked. Not too much else to say. After rook to d8, we can simply capture. We're up a pawn and we are doing very, very good there. Their better try is to go bishop to e6, which looks a little odd because after this trade here, their pawn structure is a little odd, but they can actually go pawn to e5 here, and we're actually kind of struggling in this position. The better try I would recommend is knight b to d2. This is very rare, but we defend our bishop. And once again, they have to be very careful here. If they just play like knight to f6, just try to develop normally, we now have the very nice queen to b3. We're once again getting that same kind of fork that we got before. Now we are forcing them to capture, and we can simply take back. and it is actually very, very awkward for them to defend this. So after like b6 here to, I don't know, try and get our queen away from seeing it, we can simply play rook to e1. And we are just doing great here. Our pawn is defended, our development is easy, their pawn structure is looking very, very weird, and we are doing great there. And finally, their last thing they can try to do is to immediately capture. Instead of having us to kind of induce them into it, we simply take back. And we get a similar position after like knight to f6, but here we actually have the other option of pushing up to e5 to attack them, and after like knight to d5 here, we can simply now take on d4 because the queen no longer sees it, and after this happens, let's say knight backs up, we can move our queen over to f4, and we are doing good in this position. We don't have an incredible advantage, but we still have a strong pawn in the center, our development is easy, and we quickly have open lines that we can try to exploit black with. Alright, so that is the pawn to e5 line, which is black's best try, and that is the end of the entire accepted variation. Next, let's take a look at the main line here with pawn up to e6. This is the Queen's Gambit declined, which is the most common way for black to try and defend here, and what you'll play is knight to c3. Simply putting the knight behind the pawn and adding more pressure to the center. Black has a couple of tries here, which I will look at later, but the most common one is knight to f6, and this is the Queen's Gambit kind of main line, which I'll show you. And the move you're going to play here is a little surprising. You're actually going to capture instead of keeping the tension. This is the Queen's Gambit exchange variation, and don't let the name fool you. Most exchange variations are boring. This one is not. First off, taking with the pawn is the best try, but if they take with the knight, you do have to be a little careful. You have the nice move here with pawn to e4 to attack them, and after this trade, you have a very nice center, but you still have to be a little careful here. If they play the move pawn to c5 and strike in the center, if they just play like bishop e7 here, this is not that challenging. We can simply develop knight to f3, and then we can simply play a move like bishop d3, and if black tries to play c5 now, we can just simply ignore. We can just castle here. This trade can happen, and black can try to attack us with knight c6. We can simply go bishop e3, just defending it, and we just have a small advantage due to us having a very nice center and good development, which black is kind of stunted on. But their better try is to instead play pawn up to c5 immediately, trying to attack our center, and what you'll play here is simply defend with knight to f3. And they can try to trade here, and this is their absolute best line to then play this check. We have to block, and this trade here, and now black can castle, and our position is struggling a little bit, but not to worry. First, we'll play bishop to c4. Black can try to play knight to d7. We're simply going to castle, just complete our development, and now our rooks are going to support our pawns by going like this and this. That can look something like b6 here. The rook goes to the e1 square, let's say bishop b7, the other rook goes to d1, very, very simple, and if black plays rook c8 to try and attack us, we just back up to b3, and the bishop is likely going to reroute to this diagonal instead. And after something like, let's say, rook e8, you can actually play pawn to d5 here, striking in the center, and after this trade, their bishop is blocked in. You're going to have good control of at least one of the open files, and while it's not massive, you do have a small advantage in its position, which is good. You do have a small advantage in that position. That is the knight takes on d5 line, a little rare, but you should know what to do against it. Most people instead take back with the pawn. What you'll play here now is bishop to g5. Pinning their knight to their queen, and this is where stuff gets a little complicated. Black has many move orders, but your plan here is simple. Now, what exactly is that plan? Let's say black goes bishop e7. You're going to start with pawn to e3, and your plan here is to develop your pieces like this. You're going to castle, and you're actually going to push f3 and e4, and that's going to be your strike in the center. And this can go many ways. Let's say black castle here. You're going to go bishop to d3 to start, and this here is what I would consider the main branching point. I'll look at 3 other options here before the main line. If they try and move like h6 to attack our bishop, we simply back up to h4, and this is going to be virtually the same as the main line here. Do keep in mind, if they push again like g5, this is too much. We back up to g3 here, and they really just cannot go around just kind of destroying their king side like this. After like c6 here, we can attack them. h4, the pawn must push up, and now our bishop can go to f4 here. Just attack them. Let's say they push again. Now we can just develop to e2. And even though we're not completely winning here like right away, this is not going to be good. Their king is wide open. In the future, we're going to be able to get a big attack against them. So keep that little g5 idea in mind. If they try like b6 here, this is actually a mistake. They try it in this position because we now have the very nice bishop takes, queen to h5. And out of nowhere, we are actually just straight up forking them because of this checkmate threat. So after like g6 here, you can simply take on d5. You're not completely winning once again, but you are up a pawn, which is, you're up a pawn. That you can't really complain about that. Their best sideline here, other than the main line with like c6, is c5 to once again try and strike us immediately. But this is not great either because we simply take on c5 here. They can't really actually take here, even though it looks the most natural, because we simply would play queen c2 here. We're now threatening to trade here and then win the pawn on h7. They have to play h6, but we do the same trade because who's defending the pawn on d5? I forgot. You take it. You're up a pawn once again. Queen, let's say, moves to d6 here. You even have a savage move in this position. I would definitely consider savage. Long castles. Not defending the knight because they cannot capture, because now bishop to h7 check, and their queen is lost to a discovery tactic. So that is what to do against c5 here. They do have one other option here, which is likely their best, that being knight b to d7, and delaying actually capturing. But here, nothing to worry, just develop. Knight g to e2. Knight takes on c5, trying to attack our bishop. It doesn't really matter because after we castle in this trade, that bishop actually wasn't that incredible for us. And after like bishop e6, we can simply play rook over to d1. This rook can go to the c file to capture all those juicy squares, and we are threatening some pretty nasty stuff against their isolated queen pawn. Now let's head more into the mainline territory here with c6, and once again there are many move orders, but this kind of setup here is what you will be facing as the kind of mainline position. Here you'll now play queen to c2. Once again you're making that threat of capturing and then capturing on h7, like let's say black plays some random, you do this, you win a pawn, that is very good for you. Most people then play h6 to prevent that. You'll back the bishop up. And now let's say they play knight b to d7, and their main idea here is to move the rook over and rotate this knight into f8 with a solid and compact position. Here, you now develop knight g to e2, and you're continuing the plan. You're going to go f3 and try to push up to e4. Let's say rook to e8, you just castle, and once you have castled, gotten everybody ready, then you're going to push f3 here. And once again, there are many ways they can play, but these are the general ideas. Let's say black now plays knight to e6. One important thing here is you do not need to rush with e4. In fact, it's actually bad if you rush. Instead, just keep on preparing it. You can play rook over a to d1 to reinforce this pawn, because once you push up to e4, it will not have a buddy to help protect it. Let's say black develops bishop d7. You can back up the bishop to f2. Once again, just try to reinforce the pawn even more. Let's say rook to c8 here. Black cannot really make any really quick progress. You can try a3. Trying to go b4, just take queenside space, and once again, you really do not have to rush with e4 because there's no way they can solidly prevent it. Let's say now a5. An important move here is now h3, because if we rush with e4, then after the trade, the knight can come to g4, which would be surprisingly annoying, so we can prevent that with the simple h3. Let's say now bishop d6, they try to kind of solve their position. Now, once we've gotten everybody ready, and we really have nowhere else to improve our pieces, now we can push up to e4. We have really prepared this. We're threatening to push up and fork them, which would be very good in many positions, even if we didn't have the fork. So they have to capture, and we simply capture back with the pawn. This is really what you want out of this position. You once again have the 2 pawns in the center. Your pieces are a little jungled, but still everybody is defended. You're doing well. You'll likely be able to take advantage of the now semi-open F-file, and you are doing great there. Before we move on though, there is one more line I want to show, which is likely their most challenging option, which is back here to instead jump their knight into e4 immediately. This is a little complicated because now your bishop is under threat even though we can take the knight. What we have to do here first is we have to capture, they will take back, and here we want to go f3, but if we go too fast, then knight takes, queen takes, and we are losing a pawn, possibly even 2, so that would not be very good for us. Instead, we need to prepare it once again by playing rook over to e1 first. And the reason we want this rook here is that when the f-file opens up, this rook will be right here already to take advantage of all of that juiciness. And how I'll play from here, and black has 2 lines here. They can try to defend with knight d to f6. If they try this, then now f3 works, because after they trade, we take back the knight, and now the rook defends here, and after, like, let's say queen to d6, we can prepare this with queen over to f2, because once again, if we go too fast, captures, and the pawn hangs, that is not good. Queen to f2 first, and after, like, bishop d7, now we can go h3 once again, that move, prevent the knight from coming to the very annoying g4 square, rook e7. Now, once we've prepared everybody, e4, we're going to get either 2 pawns in the center or potentially even push up and fork them. That would be really annoying for them. Before we move on, there's actually one more line that I do want to show you, which is back here. If they try instead f5 to try and just anchor in their knight, this does not work because of f3 once again. And after this happens, that was actually a very big mistake, because now who is defending this pawn from our queen and bishop? Their only try here would be like g6 without giving the pawn up immediately, but now here, even though they have this, we can still push up to e4. Let's say they capture, we would simply take back. If they try queen to d6 to try and attack us, we have the same move here, queen to over to f2. And if they capture, then our queen could get in. That could be really, really brutal, and they're going to have a lot of problems in this position. We have a large advantage. Alright, well, that's how to deal with the main line exchange Queen's Gambit variation. Before we move on, though, there is 2 other lines from here that I do want to cover, instead of them immediately playing knight to f6. What those are, let's take a look. First off, they try to capture us. You have the very nice pawn to e4, and this transposes into the open variation, sorry, not open variation, except variation when they take us, and they go pawn to e6, so that is a nice little transposition. If they try to attack us immediately with pawn to c5, this is the Tarrasch Defense, and what you'll do here is you want to capture their pawn on d5 first. You don't want to capture this guy because then you've let them develop. There's no reason to do that. You capture this one. Their best move here is to capture back right away. Capturing back on d4 isn't as good because we have the very nice queen to a4 check, really disrupting all of their development, because after like bishop d7 here, their bishop is now in the way of everything, and after queen takes, they can take, we would simply take back our queen. And at the end of the day, we are actually just up a pawn here. And after like knight c6, they can play it in a sort of gambit way, but it's not that good. We can simply develop, and then if they attack us, we can just back up to b3. And yeah, this is a kind of gambit, but not very good for them. Let's say bishop c5 here, we can go bishop g5. Pin their knight to their queen, and the best way to play here after like h6 attacking, we actually do go for the trade because their queen is in a not very good position. We can go e3 here and quickly go bishop e2, castles. Yeah, we really don't have any problems here. We're up a pawn. We are doing great. So instead of that, their better try is to capture on d5 here, and now you can simply develop. Knight to f3, just protect your pawn in the center. And after knight to c6, in this position, now capturing on c5 is actually good. Now, what is the difference? First off, they cannot take right away because we take the pawn d5. We're once again up a pawn, nothing bad there. But if they try to push up, we have the very nice and kind of rare move, knight to a4. It looks very, very peculiar and odd, but simply we're defending the pawn. They have no good way to actually try and capture it. And rather than us just being up a pawn, their only try here would be to capture, because after takes, they do have this fork. But simply bishop d2, queen takes, now rook c1. And even though we're not up material, after like queen back to b6, we have the rook on the very nice open c file, simply just more development, and we can immediately attack them with pawn to e3. They have to be very careful about this position, while we are simply going to be able to develop, quickly castle. We do not have many problems. And if they do try to capture us, then this is actually going to be a kind of gambit that is good for us because simply captures. And if they try to take with their knight, we have the savage bishop to c3. Forking them, their only try here without losing knight would be to take, and now not queen takes because we would hang our rook, but instead pawn takes. And at the end of the day, who is defending the pawn g7 and the rook in the corner? Nobody. You are winning in this position. So that's how to deal with the Tarrasch. What else they can try? They can try to go for a Rogozin, but not really Rogozin, a kind of Rogozin-ish that will transpose into the Nimzo-Indian, because they can try an immediate bishop b4 to pin our knight to our king. And here the best way to play is to simply push up to e3. Even though we block our bishop in, it really does not matter. Black will play most likely knight to f6 here. This transposes into the Nimzo-Indian. Taking immediately would be bad because simply pawn takes back. And even though our pawns are doubled, this is actually surprisingly good for us, because if they play like knight to f6, we have a savage bishop a3. And little bishop over here. Boop, boop, boop. Nobody's defending the squares here. Their king cannot castle, and this bishop is like a mole. It is really, really hard to actually get out of there. So instead, knight to f6 is the main move, and here you now play a3. Attack their bishop. They only have one good move here, which is to go for the trade. You will take back. Let's say black now simply castles here. You now have doubled pawns, so it makes sense to get rid of them. You can play pawn takes on d5 here. If they try to take for the knight, you have a very nice line, which is actually bishop d3, hanging the c3 pawn, because if they take, queen c2, and they get forked like this, and after knight drops back to d5, we take the pawn, they move over, and now bishop drops back to d3. Even though material is technically even here, after like knight to c6, we can go knight to f3, and we're simply going to quickly castle here. We're going to eventually push up to e4. We actually have a great position ahead of us, even if it doesn't look super obvious. So because of that, knight takes on d5 is not great. Instead, just taking back the pawn is their best try, and you can now simply develop once again. Go bishop d3 here. Black can try c5, attack us. We can just ignore. We just go knight to e2. If they take us, we can simply take back with our pawn, and we just have a great structure now. This is going very, very well for us. Instead, developing with knight to c6 is more common, and here, just castle. And we can actually go for the same kind of idea in the main line. We're going to try to go knight to g3 here because we have to. We're going to go f3 and e4 to fully support us pushing in the center. Let's say black goes bishop b7. We can go f3. Black can try rook e8 to prevent pawn up to e4, but it is only temporary. You have a very nice move here, which is rook to a2. The idea is we're going to rotate this rook onto the e file like this, and after like captures, we can just capture back. So no problem. We're going to get the pawn up to e4 push. We'll strike in center, and we're going to be doing great. That is how to play against the Rogozin / Nimzo-Indian-ish, whatever you want to call it, but that is how to play against it. And last but not least here, if black plays c6, this is the Semi-Slav defense, and you have a really, really fun line to beat them here, which is pawn to e4, and you're going to go into something called the Marshall Gambit. This is not a very well-known gambit, but it is insane and really, really fun for you, and not really much for black. First off, their only good move here is to capture. A lot of people don't actually like to do that though, because most people play a move like knight to f6, which is a mistake. because after pawn captures and pawn captures, we push up to e5 here, and we get a superior French defense after like knight e4. Here, you don't even have to take, you go bishop d free. Add more pressure to them, they pretty much are forced to capture, and now simply pawn takes back. And we just get a great French position here. Their bishop is blocked in. We have a just dominating pawn chain, really nothing they can do about that. Our queen can maybe go to g4 and add some, much needed fun over there. And yeah, that is going to be a very good position for you. They also commonly try bishop b4 to try and pin us, but once again, this is not good because after pawn captures and pawn captures, we have e5 once again, and we get the same kind of improved French after, like, let's say knight c6. You can go knight to f3, and your development is just so natural. You'll then go bishop to d3 here, but do not start falling asleep, because if black just castles here, you actually have a winning tactic here, the classic Greek gift sacrifice. Bishop takes on h7. I won't delve into all the variations, but after king takes and knight into g5, black is completely losing here. Let's say they drop back to g8, you can then play queen into h5. There is threats of checkmate that are very, very hard to stop, and if they try rook over d8, then we take on f7, and we are dominating. So black must watch out for that, but their best move here is to in fact capture, which not a lot of people do, but after you capture back, once again we get a position where their only good move here is bishop to b4 check. Most people simply play knight to f6. This is not good, because after knight takes and queen takes, a simple knight to f3. Their queen is misplaced, their bishop is blocked out. This is not what they want at all, and they can try to play bishop b4 check now. It's just not the same after, like, where was I? Back here. Bishop d2, simply this trade. I mean, this is a good position. Black will castle. You can long castle. Yeah, you're just doing great here. Your development will flow super naturally. Their queen is very misplaced, and yeah, I don't really know what else to say. You're doing great. But the bishop to b4 check back here is the best move, because after bishop to b4 check, bishop b4 check, they're gonna play bishop to d2, blocking this check. And black may see here that they can actually win a pawn. With queen takes on d4, this is the Marshall Gambit. You will capture their bishop, they will capture your knight, and you block with the bishop on e2. Now, this is an insane position. There are many just crazy ways that can go from here. I'll take a look at the few most common ones. First off, they try to take the pawn on g2. This doesn't work. We go bishop to f3, queen has to back up, let's say to g6, and now knight to e2, and even though we're down 2 pawns here, we are just completely murdering them. Our queen can go into d6, now our rook can come over and get the open file on the queen, and you actually have a nice advantage in this position, and black is very likely to crumble quite quick. They can also try move knight to d7, try to get some development in, but now a simple knight to f3. And the idea here would be to try and go c5 and try and block out our bishop from this diagonal, but we just back up to c3, attack this guy, and after they block, now queen into d6, and our queen performs the same job. They have not really any good moves here, and their position is just at a complete standstill, and once again you have a small advantage here because of that. Their best move is to go knight to a6. Looks a little odd, but attacking our bishop like this is the best way to go for them, and here you'll now play bishop over to a5. Threatening checkmate, that would be quite bad for them. They have to do something. The most common move here is to block with b6, and instead of moving your bishop, you have a nice queen into d6 here. The queen comes in, and now they cannot capture because then rook over to d1. This is quite murderous. They have no good way to defend, and after like f6, which is their only way to make a getaway square, f3, and we attack their queen, while c6, who's defending it? Nobody. After like, I don't know, queen e3, we can just capture, we fork them, and we are pretty much dominating this position. Engine says it's about equal, but Engine is also stupid and cannot handle the amount of pressure that black would be under. Instead, their better move here is to play bishop d7 and ignore this, and here we simply have bishop back to c3. once again, the same threat. Their only good move is to block with the pawn f6, which, by the way, this is just putrid and disgusting. I never want to look at this again. But here we have the very nice long castles, hanging our bishop, but not really because we're attacking their bishop. That would be brutal for them. Their only good move here is to counter long castle to defend this guy here. And here we can back up our queen, a3. Attack the knight, attack the pawn behind the knight. Their pretty much only good move here is to go king to b7 to defend the knight like this. But we now have bishop to f3 here. And I'm going to stop here because there are so many ways that this can play out. One trap, though, that they might fall for is if they look at this pawn c4 and says, yummy, 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 bishop drops back to e2. That is just so mean. And we are actually skewering them, and we're going to win their knight, and that is completely sad for them. And this martial gambit can get really insane, so just keep in mind, when in doubt, sacrifice material, try to murder black, because black really can crumble fast in so many of these lines unless they are razor sharp. Now let's go all the way back here to the original Queen's Gambit position, and next I'll take a look at the Slav defense with c6. This is very similar to the Queen's Gambit decline, but instead of the e pawn, it is now the c pawn, and while a slight difference, it actually is a very big difference in the long term. Here, you're going to play knight to c3 and try to attack their pawn in the center, and they have a couple of good options. First off, if they go e6, this transposes right back into the martial, and then we go e4. This is just the martial gambit, which I looked at a second ago. Bishop to f5 here is very common, but it is also very bad because queen be free. And we're actually just straight up forking them. We're attacking both of these guys. They cannot defend both. Their only try here would be queen b6, but we can simply capture. Pawn captures, and now we take on d5, and at the end of the day, we are up a pawn. We're not like completely winning, but we're up a pawn, not too much to actually complain about in that position. Their most interesting try here is probably pawn takes on c4, and after we play pawn to e4, black goes pawn to b5, and this is called the Slav Gambit. It is kind of like the accepted variation, but a little bit better. And the best way to play here is to once again strike at them with a4. Attacking, they have to be very careful. If they play bishop d7, then after the trade, it is right back in the accepted territory with d5. You might not remember this exact line, but this is a direct transposition, and once again, we are just completely dominating all of their pieces. So that is not great for them. Instead, pushing up to b4 is the greatest here, and in the other line, we could drop our knight into b5, but here we sadly do not have the luxury, so we have to play the slightly ugly move, knight to a2. It looks very weird, and admittedly it is. We are attacking the pawn, and what if they just defend it with like pawn to a5 here? Well, now, the pawn c4 is still hanging, we're going to capture, but after like e6, what we do about this knight is when this bishop develops out somewhere, the knight will rotate to its place and then over to somewhere like b3. That can look something like knight to f3 here. Let's say black goes like knight to d7, we go bishop to e3, and yeah, it's the same story. Knight will drop back to c1 and then rotate somewhere else, I don't know, let's say like b3, and now the knight is out of the depths and actually doing something quite useful. Their best try here is to go knight to f6 and counterattack our pawn in the center, and you're going to push up to e5 here. Attack them, the only good square to move it is knight into d5, and now we can take the pawn on c4. Black can now defend this pawn with their bishop by playing e6, and this is one of the best lines for them, and how you'll play from here is you're going to go knight to f3, let's say they develop, bishop to e7, and we're going to quickly castle. We now play bishop to d2. We're threatening to capture the knight, like if they play like castles here, threatening to capture the knight, and then capture the pawn here. We're doing very well, we win a pawn. So instead they'll defend here, likely with pawn up to a5, and now you can simply castle. And after black castles as well, we have the same plan. Our knight rotates back to c1, and is going to go to either d3 or b3. Let's say black now plays knight to d7, you can play knight over to b3 here. And after like, I don't know, h6, you can simply play queen to e2, just keep on developing, you have better control of this diagonal, you can potentially drop the bishop back to d3 and put the queen on e4 and go for this battery, and also don't forget to control the c-file with this rook like so. That's how to play in the kind of pseudo-accepted variation, but let's look at if they'd play knight to f6 first. After this move, we're going to go e3 here, and if they play e6 now, this goes into the Semi-Slav defense. But real quick though, a lot of people try to not get their bishop blocked out and instead first go bishop f5 like this, but this is a mistake because of the same idea we saw a little bit ago, queen b3. We get the exact same fork. They can't really defend both and still have a good position. Like if they play b3, then after captures, a simple bishop to b5 check. We are doing very, very well here. This would be very awkward and lose a pawn. Instead, most people opt to defend with queen to b6, but now a simple trade. And we take the pawn on d5, and in this position, even though we're not up a pawn, their pawn structure is just atrocious. This is completely disgusting. You have a nice advantage just because of that just deformity. So keep that queen to b3 idea in mind, but pawn to e6 first is the better move. And the Semi-Slav is normally a little boring, but I have found a very fun gambit for you to try. First, you'll go knight to f3. Let's see, black goes knight b to d7. You want to put the queen here on c2. Get all of these juicy squares. And by the way, if black ever takes on c4, just take back with the bishop, and the bishop will drop back to d3 eventually because this is a more useful diagonal. But most people here simply play bishop d6, and now you have the extremely fun move here, g4. This is the Shabalov attack, and even though it looks completely insane, objectively, the best black can get here is an even position. Now, our idea is we are going to push up to g5, and black has two options. They can either block the move here with h6 and try to stop that, or they can accept the pawn. You'll now play rook to g1 here, if they tried this. You are skewering them, their knight and the pawn behind them, so if they just drop back, you can simply take. This is very, very good for you, but a keen eye might see they can actually take a second pawn on h2, and they might do exactly that. Here, you have to capture, they must take back, and now you take on g7, and there are quite a few ways that this can go down, but in most of the variations, you're going to go bishop d2 and quickly long castle, because if you look at black's position here, they cannot castle short because the rook is right there, but also castling long is quite a ways away. The most popular move here is for black to play queen to f6 and attack the rook, and here you can take the pawn h7, but what is even better is to drop the rook back to g2. Attack their bishop, because after they move it back, you can immediately strike in the center with e4. This looks a little crazy because it does hang the pawn on d4 over here, but now a simple bishop e3. We're getting a ton of development, and after the queen moves, even though we're still down 2 pawns here, we simply take on d5. Pawn takes back, and we take once again. We're going to win at least 1 pawn back, and let's say they take again, we can just take. And it is just complete and utter suffering for them. It is so sad. If they try to drop back and just try to defend everybody, you have a savage long castles. And you're just playing it slow because black's position is so miserable, you don't need to play it fast, it will play itself. So that's how to play if they actually capture the pawn on g4 in the Shabalov, but if they instead try to block it with, let's say, pawn up to h6 here, like so, stopping us from pushing up to g5, here you'll now play rook over to g1. Defending the pawn, and potentially in the future, you can then push up. And I'll take a look at the most common line here. Black's best move is to counter-strike in center immediately with e5. Really, their only good move. You'll capture on d5 first. You're going to let this pawn hang in the center. They will capture back, and you now have the move knight to b5 here. This is the absolute best line. You attack their bishop. It is hanging. Their best square is to back up to b8. And here, because of how awkward his pawn is right now, you have to get rid of it right away with g5 before they can go and kick your knight out. And after pawn captures, you'll take back the knight, and now pawn pushes up to e4. And this is black's best try. We do have a bit of an odd position here because all of our pieces are kind of away from each other and odd, but we are actually doing well here because we have the nice rotation, bishop d2, let's say black now plays knight to b6, they definitely do not want to just castle here, because this would walk right into our rook, and most likely they're going to get mauled in some just sad attack. So instead, knight to b6 and delaying castling is what most people do, and you can now play rook over to c1 here. And your king is going to go uncastled, but in reality, nothing can really attack it, so it doesn't really matter. And after like bishop d7, like black tries to figure out the just jigsaw pieces of just undeveloped pieces, you have bishop b4. Now them castling is forever prevented, and you potentially have ideas of launching one of your pieces into their position, potentially even you getting your queen in to help as well, and this can lead to a lot of fun games. And that is how to play against the Semi-Slav with the a little dubious but fun Shabalov attack. And here I'll now look at the last sidelines which black may play. First off, knight to f6 is the Martial defense, and Martial Gambit might be good, but his defense certainly is not, because after you capture their pawn, they pretty much must capture back, but no piece is actually very good at doing that. If they take with the knight, then simply e4. We attack them, and after knight drops back, a simple knight c3, and yeah, we just have a big pawn center here. We're doing great. Most people just play like e6, which is not very challenging, and after like knight f3, we can go bishop f4. We just have an advantage. We have good development. We have two big pawns in the center. You really don't have much else you can ask for in that position. Their best try here is e5, which is quite rare, but it is their best try. And what to do here, once you see the pawn on e5, you don't take, you don't push, you play knight to f3, you kind of defend everybody, and after they take here, you can take with the knight, but what I like doing more is to take with the queen, because after this trade here, we just have an advantageous endgame. If endgames are your thing, you might want to take with the knight first, but here you have an extra piece developed and an extra pawn in the center, which you can promptly defend with like f3 here, and yeah, it's just a better endgame for you, not too much you would like to ask for. And one more note, back here, if they instead take with the queen, like queen takes on d5, then a simple knight c3. You just attack their queen, they have to move it somewhere, it's kind of like a scuffed Scandinavian. Let's say they drop back to d8, you can now play pawn up to e4, take the center, and this is actually a direct transposition to if they take on d5 with the knight first instead. So Martial is not very good, but what is a little better is the Albin Countergambit with e5. Now, how to play against this gambit is quite dangerous. There are traps, but I'm going to show you how you can avoid all of it. First, you take the gambit. You accept their pawn on e5. Their only good move here is to push up to d4, and here they're going to play knight to f3 first. Attack the pawn, and we want to play pawn to e3 here, but if we let black play the bishop to b4 check, that can actually lead to a very nasty trap here, so keep that in mind. If black tries to defend with c5, then we actually can play this move because the bishop cannot come to b4. And after like knight to c6 here, we can simply capture and then go bishop d3. We're up a pawn, we have good development, we'll quickly castle. We really do not have that many problems in this position. Not really many problems. Their better move is to go knight to c6 and defend like this instead, at which point you'll play a3. Just forever prevent the bishop from ever coming there. That way you can now play pawn to e3 in these positions. Now, first off, they try move like a5 here, which is surprisingly common, thinking we're going for the b4 push. Then now simply e3, and we just have a fantastic position here. After like bishop c5, we would simply capture, and after a very nice bishop e3, attacking everybody, they can take, we take back. We're up a pawn here. Black does not really have anything to show for it, and you are just completely dominating here. Not too much else to say. A better move is bishop to g4, attempting to capture our knight and then win the pawn back, but we're not going to let them. We have the very nice knight to b2 in a very odd rotation, which comes after black develops, most likely with knight g to e7. We have the very odd knight to b3. It looks weird, but the idea is we're going to attack the d4 pawn and try to win that instead. Black will now likely capture our knight. We'll take back with the pawn. And real quick though, if black tries like knight to g6 to try and not lose the pawn, a simple f4. Defending this guy, we are now dominating. That does not work. Instead, they have to capture, at which point now we take on d4, and this trade will commence. And yeah, there's not much here. Black can try to long castle, but a simple bishop e3, this is like their absolute best line here, and they really do not have that much to show for being down a pawn in an endgame. So that is how to beat the Albin Countergambit. Not great, but it is an attempt. Let's take a look at the move pawn to c5. This is the Austrian Variation, just attempting to just copy us and try to get some sort of an even position. What you'll do here is you're going to capture on d5 first. If they try to keep mirroring us and capture on d4, we will just take back on d4, and yeah, we're just up a pawn here, like e6, we can just defend e4. There's not too much else to say here. Let's say they trade, just nice e3. We're up a pawn in center, not too much else to say in that position. The better move is to capture on d5 here, at which point you can play knight to c3, just defending the pawn in the center. They're likely going to capture it, and here you have a nice move. You can actually play knight to c3 first, attacking their queen. They certainly cannot take because that is a free queen, because we have this very nice pin here. And after they move, then we can capture in d4 with our knight, and we're not winning here, but we have 2 extra pieces developed, and we just have a good position. After like e5, we can back the knight up to b3. It's kind of like black got into a Scandinavian and then got lost on the Dora Explorer map. If they back up to c7 here, we can then simply go e4. We have a beautiful anchor for our knight to go to on d5. I mean, development is easy, life is easy, we are doing great. And here I have 2 more things they can try. First off, back in this position, they can try bishop to f5. This is the Baltic Defense. That's a funny name, but it just doesn't work because the pawn here is now undefended, so we just have queen to b3. Attacking the pawn here, attacking the pawn on b7. And really, this is just not going to be very good for them. If they try to block us with like b6, we can simply take on d5, and we are up a pawn. It's not super clean, but we're up a pawn. We have a nice bit of an advantage after like knight f6, knight c3. Yeah, we're doing well here. They have no way to actually go ahead and win that. They can try to capture us on c4, but we would simply take on b7, attack the rook. They only have 1 move, knight to d7, and now we can just develop. Knight to c3, let's say they go e6 here, trying to, I don't know, maybe trap our queen or something, but this would not be good because we can counter strike in the center, e4. Their bishop is hit. They have to back it up to g6, and now we can go ahead and grab this guy on c4. The rook coming over and attacking our queen is never scary. We can also just grab another pawn. And even though we are pawn hungry here, black has no way to actually punish us for this. We can quickly go knight to f3, castle. We really have just no problems there. Their absolute best try is to go pawn to e6, but once again, we can take on b7, attack the rook. Have to play knight to d7, and now here, instead of winning a pawn, the easiest way to play here is c5. Just push the pawn up. Their position is very locked down when we are up a pawn, and if they try to counter strike in center with e5, simply e3. Keep the pawn chain going, and from here we can go like knight to f3, maybe bishop e2, quickly castle, and we are still up a pawn in position. Yeah, not too much else to say, we are doing well. And finally, the last thing I have for you is the move knight to c6 here. This is the Chigorin Defense, and this is not great because blocking the pawn like this is not recommended. The best way to play here is to simply go knight to c3 here and attack the pawn. If they capture us, we can simply push up to d5 and attack their knight. They can move over like e5 here, but we have a very nice f4. Attacking them, they have to drop back, and now e4 here. We're not completely winning, but the pawn is going to be lost, and we have a complete domination of center space, so that is just a nice advantage for us. The better try for them is likely knight to f6 here, like this, but here we'd simply go knight to f3. Just keep on developing. This knight is always going to be a bit of a problem for them because the c pawn is always going to be stuck, and after like e6, we can just go bishop to g5, and we're basically going to get a kind of Queen's Gambit mainline position, but on steroids because once again the knight is bad. Alright, well, thank you so much for watching. This might be the longest video I've ever made. I don't know, I have to check. But whatever happens, subscribe, like, do that stuff. I hope you have a great day, and I will see you next time. Hopefully.